Welcome to Lunch Hour Live. I'm Executive Arts Editor Jared Bowen of WGBH. We are delighted to be resuming our digital sessions with you, even as we practice social distancing and out of an abundance of caution. I am coming to you from my home. And we welcome you if you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And just keep in mind throughout our conversation today, we will be taking your questions. I'm joined today by Hetty Friedman, who is a master weaver. Hi, Hetty. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jared, for having me today.
So just to start, give me a sense of what a master weaver is for people who are uninitiated, the breadth of what that encompasses.
Well, you start to learn to weave whenever you do, and there are many paths to become a master. In my case, I have a master's in fine arts degree, which is what they call a terminal degree after college. Some people go through a rating system, like the Weavers Guild of Boston, of which I'm on the board, has an official rating system, and you go to apprentice and journeyman and learn all the techniques.
What's the breadth of your materials and what you produce? Well, we'll go a deeper dive. We'll even show people how you produce in a moment, but we see some of it behind you. Give me a sense of your spectrum.
I started out weaving lots of different things, rugs, placemats, table runners, blankets, but I ended up, as I developed my voice, which came actually through color and texture, I focus now on wearables, scarves, shawls, Mobius shawls, and loops for men and for women. And I still do some tablewares, but mostly I do wearables. So people sort of end up focusing.
And as we see, I think you're coming to us from your home as well. Are you coming to us from a part of your studio? What surrounds you there?
Yes, I'm in a 3-story Victorian in Newton, and my studio has sort of taken over the house as my kids have grown and moved out. So this is the main studio, and there's a wall full of yarn, but now the yarn is also on the floor, and we call it our stash. I have some cones of yarn that are probably 20 or 30 years old that I save. I have 5 looms. 1 in this room and then 2 in the living room. I have 4 harness looms and 8 harness looms and an inkle loom and card weaving. So tools of the trade.
Well, as I mentioned, we have some videos that you shared with us that do come from your website that we'd like to show people to give a sense of what fiber arts look like. So we'll roll the first of your video clips in now to take people into a look at that process.
I learned to weave in 1966 at Bucks Rock, a creative arts camp in Connecticut. It continues to amaze me that you can create a piece of fabric by simply throwing the shuttle back and forth through the warp threads. My main fascination is with the colors and textures of the yarns and how the combinations are limitless. I love to share my work and seeing the emotions that it elicits. I love to design, and I love to see my work out in the world.
That seems very soothing, especially with the music there, the classical music accompaniment. I would imagine it's something great to do in this moment, in a quarantine where you are confined to your home and you can offer even more focus on your art.
Yes, it's true. I'm actually spending time not doing my production work, which I do for shows to sell because my shows are all canceled. And I've been working on my little 8 harness shack doing some learning work with different structures. And yeah, but it's a really good place to go and just say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you keep going, something will come of it.
Well, take me back. Do you understand this far into your career? Was there a pivotal moment that you turned to weaving and fiber arts? How did it happen for you?
I went to college, Clark University in Worcester, and I studied everything liberal arts, all theology, psychology, sociology. And I was always weaving. We had a program at the Worcester Center for Crafts, and I studied with Dick Sauer in those days. But the anthropology became very strong, and one of my mentors suggested I go to Guatemala in the 70s to learn where weaving was fundamental to people's lives. Up until that point, my work had been more about fine arts and gallery work. So I think that was pivotal. I came back, I did an MFA, and then had a studio. So I did it for full time, but it was a lonely, difficult way to make a living in those days. And I decided to try to get a job in industry, and I did. And so I had a 30-year career in industry, ended up doing an MBA. And then when I got downsized from that job, brought the MFA and the MBA back together again. And now I'm running a business, and I'm weaving, and I'm designing and merchandising. So it just seemed that it was always something that was always in my life.
Well, to go back to something you just talked about especially learning, and we'll talk about your travels in Guatemala in a moment as well, or later on in this broadcast, but how can it be such an integral part of life, and what makes it so? Is it the tactile part? Obviously, you're producing pieces that people live with and need. Dive into that a little bit for me, if you would.
You mean for me personally, why it is?
Yes.
I think when I first did it, it wasn't so much about what people needed. It was that I was always a good math and science student. And actually, my dad was an engineer. And at one point, I thought that could have been a route that I took. But of course, I wanted to go in the opposite direction. I loved art. My parents were collectors. I grew up following them around to galleries and things like that. But I wasn't a really great drafts person. I couldn't draw as well. So I had an ability to do art. I really just liked the structure of it. You use graph paper, you use numbers. It was challenging in that way. There was always something to learn. So I think for me, it's fundamental. The year my mother passed away, which was 2005, I wove more than I'd ever woven before. And I look back on that, and I think it's just a place of comfort, that no matter what's going on for me, I can go there and feel a knowing.
As we continue, I just want to remind people that we're taking your questions, whether obviously you're at home, presumably at this point, on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Feel free to send those in. And I have my phone right here where the questions are being passed to me. But I also read, and I'm so heartened by this, because you picked some of my own favorite artists, Picasso, Matisse, and then notably Joseph and Ani Albers have been major influences on how you've created. Tell me about that.
When I did my MFA, which was at UMass Dartmouth, which used to be Southeastern Massachusetts University, but in the beginning of its career, it was New Bedford Textile Tech. And they had a fabulous technology department. This was in the mid-'70s. I didn't realize it wasn't going to be just making art. There was also an academic component. We studied philosophy of art, and we had to write a thesis. And so one of my mentors there, my thesis advisor, had studied Bauhaus graphic design and really taught me a lot about applying design concepts to my work. We did color theory. And so I did my thesis on Ani Albers. There's so much about the Black Mountain College when they came here and in North Carolina, and how the women were in the weaving studio, but they did beautiful artwork. So it was not just wearables, it was art. And actually MoMA just had a show recently and featured her work. So I love that combination.
How would you describe again, I'm just kind of besotted by all of the colors behind all of everything that we see. How would you describe your design aesthetic and what you do as you create scarves and other materials?
Some weavers are structure. They have 24 harness computer aided design looms, and they talk about how the yarns interact with each other in a structure or a texture. I'm what I would call more color and texture. I could do my work on a 2-harness loom, but I might use 17 colors and 5 different textures. I love to combine bamboo and rayon. I either plan it out where I put the yarns on the floor of my studio and I think about the combinations. And sometimes I'm merchandising for a reason. If I have an account down in Naples, Florida, what's happening, or what's popular in Maine or Cambridge, Massachusetts, or Long Island. And other times I do what's jazz. I pick colors that speak to me. I put them on the floor near my warping board, and I just go with it. And so I guess that's the way I go about designing.
Well, to return to the process and the videos that you have shared with us, we have one now that we'd like to show people that I believe this is where you're making a scarf. It's just before that moment where you reach the loom. Let's show people now.
Once I have a warp wound, and these are the colors and the cones that went into winding this warp, a combination of bamboo and rayon, I have to lash off each of the yards on the board so that the threads stay organized. So I wrap it around twice and make a bow. And I tie off the cross top and bottom and top and bottom, and this keeps the yarns in order. And now I'm going to cut this off and make a warp chain. So I put my scissor right here, I pull it off the warping board, I cut, and now very slowly I'm going to twist, and I'm like making a big braid out of this warp. This is 14 yards. It's long enough to make 6 Mobius shawls. And once I get it off the warping board, I will pick wefts for it, put it in a bag, and it'll be ready to go onto the loom.
So interesting to get a sense. I misspoke earlier. I said scarf, but you're showing us shawls there. How long is the process? I'm sure this is a question you get all the time, but what is the length of the process that it takes from start to finish?
Depends. It depends. There's something called the denier of the yarn, which is the thickness of it. It could be super thin or super thick. It depends on how many ends per inch. You know, this piece I'm wearing was 12 ends per inch. You can count them, but you can also do something that's 36 or 42 ends per inch. My work typically is more drapey and fluid. So the weaving itself, which is throwing of the shuttle, I can weave a Mobius shawl in an hour and 20 minutes. I'm a production weaver, but there's a whole process. The winding of the warp can take 2 hours. The designing takes time. Threading the loom can take another couple of hours. Each one of the strings has to be pulled through a heddle and through the reed, and then it has to be tied on. And then, of course, once it's done, the pieces have to be sewn and washed and ironed and inspected. So it's a process.
Well, how rigid is that process? Suddenly I'm remembering my grandmother knitting when I was a child, and she would make mistakes and have to tear everything out and go back to the beginning or the middle or wherever it happened. Do you have any room for error in what you do?
Once it's on the loom, you can tell right away if there have been threading errors and you have to back it out and redo it. Like right now, I had mentioned I'm doing some more complicated work on my 8 harness loom and experimenting. And if I get distracted or I'm listening to a podcast, all of a sudden I look down and go, oh no, it had caught another string. And I'm pretty good. I'm proud of myself. I have to back out. The other night I did, instead of orange, green, navy, orange, green, navy, I had done 2 oranges. I took it out and then I said, now it's time to take a break. So I stopped for the moment.
How much room for innovation is there in what you do? Is there room to sort of branch out and try new things?
So much room. There's always new things. I get magazines hand woven. I go to the Weavers Guild of Boston every month and get new ideas. I learn from other weavers. Whenever I travel, I'm looking at color combinations, or I go to other countries and see their textiles. So it's limitless. I feel like I'm still learning, and there's always something to do.
So we are getting some of our questions from our viewers on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter right now. I'm sorry if my internet connection, I see my headshot, maybe my internet connection isn't so great, but first question, well, you've answered how long it takes to make one. How far back in history does weaving go?
You know, I thought of that last night when I was thinking about this interview. I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of years. It's one of the fundamental ways of making cloth, of making bags. I know the Guatemala story of 500, 600 years, they use these backstrap looms. They make baskets. So I can't tell you, unfortunately. I'll have to read up on that and let you know.
Another question, and we were just talking about this, well, what happens if you make a mistake? Can you go back and fix it, or do you have to start completely start over if you're listening to the podcast, as you were mentioning earlier?
I never start over, and I'm experienced enough that I can make corrections. So once it's off the loom, like you'll see in a minute, I can actually cut a warp yarn once the fabric's made, and with a needle, integrate it back into the fabric. Those of you who have hand woven pieces that got moth eaten, you can go to people who can do that kind of restoration. So I'm pretty good right now at repairing off the loom.
Well, as we want to continue to take people through this process, we also have a video that, again, you provided us that takes us to the loom and how the pieces come off, which I have to say is very fascinating. There's a lot more on the loom than I realized. Let's take a look.
Welcome back to the studio. I finished 6 hand-painted Mobius shawls, and I'm going to cut it off the loom now. So first I cut along the back beam bar and let this fall, and then I go to the front and then pull it out through the reed, open up the lock, and pull it off the loom. Wow! I'm always so excited to see them. There's a twill. This has a little bit of black and lime in it. You can see the different colors of the hand painting. This one is Lurex, which I really think is a little sparkly. This was the navy blue twill. Ah! And now I'm going to cut them apart.
How much work is that there that we just saw? I mean, that's tremendous.
Well, I'm a production weaver to say, so I have to be economical with my time. So by doing such long warps, 14 yards, the setting up, the winding of the warp all gets amortized over the time it takes me to weave. So it's a lot of work, but you can do a warp a week. It depends how much time you spend. I have people, contract weavers, shout out to Angie Rocket in Connecticut and a couple of other people. I have Mass College of Arts students that work for me as studio assistants that come in when there's not a coronavirus happening, that help me wind warps, that help me tag, that help me iron, because I'm running a business, so I need to get enough product ready to go to galleries and museum shops and things like that.
How about the machine? How do you have to have a relationship with that machine? You must obviously want to have a great deal of comfort. And how well do you know it? How long have you had it?
Yes, that's a great question. This particular Leclerc that you saw me pulling off of, that's sitting in front of me, my father bought me in 1969, and I used to have it on the 3rd floor of my house in Brooklyn, New York. And I love this loom. A lot of people don't like Leclerc looms. Looms operate differently. I own a Maycumber loom, which is an excellent loom, and people love it down on the 1st floor. And it's not my favorite. It's the way you push the treadles that matter. I recently got hold about 5 years ago of a shacked 8-harness loom. So people have different preferences, and I use different looms for different things.
Just a moment ago, you mentioned the impact of the coronavirus. I know through my arts coverage how widespread this impact is, especially for institutions and individual artists such as yourself. What do you find you're able to do? What's going to be the lasting impact of this pandemic at this point, do you think?
I don't know, because it's not over yet. I sell to a lot of boutique galleries. I sell to museum shops. Everybody's shut down. I sell to women's clothing stores, and I don't know, some of them I'm very concerned with the future. I had 5 major events: Paradise City Arts Festival, Lincoln Center through the Art Writer people, Newton Open Studios, where I make 40% of the income for my year in, and all of those are canceled. So right now I'm fortunate because about 3 years ago, I started doing online. I have an Etsy shop and taking photographs of my work, but not all hand weavers are able to do that. So Jared, I don't know. I just pray that the stores can recoup, that people are buying gift certificates and going to online as much as they can right now.
Do you have a sense yet of how the CARES Act and government stimulus funding might also benefit artists and small businesses such as yourself?
It's hard to say. I know anybody who's out there who's an artist, the Mass Cultural Council are offering $1,000 grants. Go online, you can apply for that. Some of us, as I said, I'm a little bit more running a business, but I have a lot of weaver friends who do this more informally. So I don't really know if there's money available for that kind of thing. The galleries, they'll have to go figure it out. When will we gather together again? I don't know. I'm a visual artist like yourself. You work with groups of people surrounding you. We don't know yet.
Have you been able to, I've seen some stories and some local organizations, costume shops at theaters, for instance, that are able to help in making masks. Have you been able to coordinate any of those efforts or participate in any of those efforts? I know obviously you're trying to keep those around you afloat and yourself afloat as well, but have you been able to enter into those arenas too?
I have a number of friends who are fabric artists who do things out of fabric that they're doing them. My work is a little bit anyway, it wouldn't be a very good mask. And actually, I'm not a wonderful seamstress, so I'm leaving that to other people. I'm doing by donating money to the organizations. I do a lot of philanthropy out of my business. So local organizations and organizations abroad trying to keep money going where it needs to go so that these NGOs can keep helping the people that they support.
Returning to our questions for a moment, do you have a type of yarn that you like to use?
I do. My two main fibers are rayon and bamboo. They're both cellulose fibers. They come from trees. They're very soft. They're hand washable. They're very drapey. I stopped working in wool years ago. I can't really wear it that much, and you can't really hand wash it. Silk can be very expensive. And then I use cotton for the project I'm working on now with table linens and table runners and things like that.
I also want to talk this. I love about what you do. It's wonderful to be able to go back to the cultures that you were originally talking about at the onset of this interview. But you spent a fair amount of time in Guatemala. What have you discovered there, learned there, and how do you help there?
My first visit to Guatemala was in 1975. After I graduated from college, I went down and lived with a Mayan weaver family in Paulina Escuintla. And it's amazing to me, but I've since reunited with that family. And then I couldn't go back for 35 years because of the Civil War, the genocide of the Mayas. It was too dangerous. In 2006, I had the opportunity to go down and volunteer with a fair trade weavers cooperative. It's 180 women out of Solala. A woman, Eliza Strode from the Thread of Hope, introduced me to them. And I started consulting for them, designing for them, kind of broadening the scope of techniques that they were using, teaching them other two harness weaves, and doing marketing and design work for them. When I lost my corporate job and I still was the health insurance provider, I had a kid in college, I joined my volunteer work in Guatemala with my weaving business, and thus Hetty Friedman Designs. And now I contract them to do some of the work for me. We do dyeing. I also support other NGOs, their reproductive health and education for Mayan women, Wings, Guatemala, Sharing the Dream, which is an elder care project, beading. Women who have to support themselves have learned other techniques other than weaving. And I do tours. Every year I bring down groups. I hope we can do it in 2021. We just got back March 7th. Groups of women travelers come down with me to see how beautiful the country is and to meet artisans and shaman and all sorts of things.
How much of the culture is built around the process of craft and making?
A lot, especially the women. They work out of their homes. They can take a backstrap loom on their back. They can be breastfeeding their baby and weaving. The problem is that the indigenous weaving that they had been doing for their clothes, you see in Guatemala, they still speak 27 Mayan languages, and the women still wear their indigenous traje. Part of that was because they were in that bubble during the Civil War, but they can't really make a living doing that. It takes way too long for them to do it, and they don't aspire for their daughters to be backstrap weavers. Their daughters are learning Spanish and going to school to be teachers and bankers. So I'm fearful that over the next decade, it might begin to die out. But
I know of another woman who does something similar to what you do. So is that part of their industry now, to have people such as yourself who can form these partnerships so that they have a much broader audience and market?
There's a very wide range. The group that I work with, that's what they do. They can take other people's designs on and do it. There are other kinds of NGOs who support smaller co-ops of maybe 10 to 14 women, people like Mayan Hands, and they do indigenous work and they bring it up and sell it at cultural survival events and things like that. So there's very many colors in this crystal of how these women are being supported.
And last question on this point, an exchange of ideas. Now that you're so much further along into your career, you're not simply just learning from them anymore. What are those exchanges like when you go down?
I'm humbled by them always. They laugh at me a lot. I am tall and have big feet, and my Spanish is más o menos. I just love their sense of place. They know who they are. They know where they're from. There's so many things with the work being done and the organizations down there.
Just before we close, I want to talk about the Weavers Guild of Boston. This is something of which you are a part, and I imagine this is the community here in our region for people who are more interested in doing what you do and to purchase from what you do.
Yep. The Guild, it's the oldest guild in America. We have 250 members. You can be a novice and you can be a master weaver. We meet once a month when we can. We just had a conversation this morning about our May meeting. Once a month and get together for classes. We do lunch together. We do Weavers Helping Weavers in the afternoon. We have speakers that come, which is all included. You can go on to their website, Weavers Guild of Boston, and join. We do an annual sales event that was hugely successful. There were, I think, 1,400 woven pieces. I go and I work there to help sell, and I'm always buying things and looking at what other people are doing. And our 100th anniversary is 2022. So I'll probably circle back, Jared, to see you in another year.
We're very fond of covering anniversaries at WGBH and with my show Open Studio. And before I leave you, I'll give you a chance to where can people buy your work? As you mentioned earlier, you have a website, you're on Etsy. I'm sure this is a moment where people are returning to craft. They want to help small businesses and individuals such as yourself. How can they do that?
Well, HettyFriedman.com, HettyFriedmanDesigns.com. There's a newsletter I send out twice a month that's fun. It could be books I'm reading and things I'm cooking. It could be travel. I also send out promotional coupons and tell you when there are sales. I have an Etsy shop that you can access through my website. And in Instagram, like I'm trying to do social media as well as I can. So I do stories now, Instagram and Facebook. So thank you so much. Just take a look. It's great. A lot of stuff. We're putting on more stuff every week.
Well, Hetty Friedman, it's been our pleasure to have you. Before I let you go, I just want to, again, draw people to your website, HettyFriedmanDesigns.com. We want to thank everybody who joined Hetty and me here on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We'll be back next week for a lunch hour, or in 2 weeks, I should say, with a lunch hour live looking at Urbanity Dance. Once more, Hetty Friedman, thank you so much for joining us for Lunch Hour Live today. We really appreciate it.
It was a wonderful opportunity. Thank you for having me. And anybody interested in weaving, get in touch.
Great.